growth spurts that we've had in Pakistan for the last 40 or 50 years. We've had growth spurts, people now write about the golden era that we had 7, 8 years of growth. The fact of the matter is, growth beyond 5% was only there for 4 years. That 7% and 9% numbers were just for 2 years. In the best of times, when $70 billion came into this economy in an 8-year period, we could only manage 2 years, once when there was a 9% growth rate and once there was a 7% growth rate. And then we think of it as a miracle. Miracle is Vietnam growing at 7%, 6.5%, 7% and more for 17 years. Miracle is China and India growing at 7-8% for 30 years, for 25 years. Producing a circus trick of 2 years of high growth is not what I call a miracle economy. So therefore, the first challenge is to produce a growth rate which is sustainable, which is high, because we have an increase in the labor force of almost 3 million people a year. And we have to provide jobs. And increasingly, as the demographic dividend or the youth bulge kicks in, this 3 million is likely to increase to 4 million a year. 4.5 million people, young people, will come into the labor force every year. Therefore, the trick really is, and there's no trick, but what we need to do is to grow the economy on a sustainable basis with no tricks like this of 2 years or 3 years of high growth rates and talk about it as a miracle economy. So that's the first thing. Secondly, but there is some good news for this year, and let me share that with you as well. There's not all gloom and doom. This year, we expect a modest recovery. GDP growth is going to be, real GDP growth is going to be around 3.5%, 3 to 3.5% being conservative this year. In agriculture, we expect growth of around 2.5%. Large-scale manufacturing of around 5%, despite the energy situation. Okay, and I'll talk about this growth rate a bit more because it's important to put it in context as well. And services very conservatively around 3%. First, in agriculture, what's happened that's turned around the situation? One, as you know, in November, we had issued a forecast. We were expecting growth to be around 2.5% or even lower. And this comes on growth of 1.7% last year. The revised number will be around 1.7% for last year. So there's an automatic base effect. But despite that, we were expecting in November growth of only about 2.5%. Because we were then firmly in the throes of what we call what the climatologists call an El Nino phenomenon. We had a very intense drought situation, a drought period when rains were not coming on time. And partly, your energy situation is obviously related to that. Because for months now, the dams, the major dams, both Tarbela and Mangla have been at dead level and have not been contributing to hydropower generation. The furnace or the fuel oil mix has changed dramatically. Gas is also has not stepped up to the plate because of Qadirpur, problems with Qadirpur. As a result, the fuel mix has changed almost entirely to furnace oil. And as luck would have it, furnace oil prices have gone up almost 100% in the last 1 year or so. So that's the reason the government is increasing electricity tariffs, because it has no other choice. It is trying to move towards a full cost recovery tariff in the power sector to make it viable. But that's the reason this circular debt issue is also not being resolved, because as we increase tariffs 10%, 15%, we find furnace oil prices have gone up, water in the dams has gone down, and we're more constrained and woke. So we're just basically running round and round trying to play catch up to international furnace oil prices. But it's also important to put this growth in context. Okay, I do recognize, like I said, large scale manufacturing is going to grow at about 5%, roughly around 5%, could be a bit higher. And this is almost counterintuitive to what we know about the energy situation and production in the economy. Well, the fact of the matter is, as almost all of you know, you're all well-read and well-plugged-in people, the large-scale manufacturing has its own energy generation, by and large. In fact, if you look at the B3 and B4 tariff usage numbers, which the Federal Bureau of Statistics provides us via WABDA or PEPCO, you find there is a nominal 4 to 5% growth in energy consumption, energy usage in the large-scale manufacturing industries. So this is entirely consistent with that. However, the real bombshell of the energy situation has fallen on your small and medium enterprises, which are totally exposed, they're totally vulnerable. So be it the tailor master, or be it this person selling the corner shop selling groceries, or whatever, or maybe that's not that affected, but anybody in the manufacturing stream, the kaddiwalas, or all these people, their production is certainly going to be hugely negative. Okay, so why am I still talking about a 3 to 3.5% growth rate in this context? Because unfortunately, we cannot capture the actual situation of the small and medium enterprise, the output growth or the output conditions of the SME sector. In Pakistan, we use traditionally for the last 50 years, like many other countries, we use a plug number for SME growth. And this plug number, I mean, there's a census that occurs every 10 years of the conditions of the SME sector, and then growth rate is imputed, and that growth rate is then used for 10 years. It's not changed, irrespective of the on-the-ground realities or whatever is happening around us. Unfortunately, we are using a 7.5% fixed growth rate in these calculations for the SME sector, right? Whereas we know that anecdotally, and what we can see is that the small and medium enterprise sector will record a very large contraction, and not just because of the energy situation. The second thing is that in the NWFP especially, and parts of Balochistan, and also as a collateral damage in other parts of the country of the war on terror, the small and medium enterprise sector has been very badly hit through strikes or through shutdowns, and all sorts of impacts on the purchasing power of people via the adjustment in energy tariffs as well. So that's the reality. Unfortunately, it's not going to get recorded into the national accounts. I'll unfortunately have to say that we'll grow at 3.5%, because that's the way the national accounts is constructed, not just in Pakistan, but in any other part of the world. So there's a silver lining to there, there's a big caveat to there. That's not the true state of the economy, I have to admit. But at least large-scale manufacturing and agriculture, and as a result of that, a large part of services have actually done better this year than they've done last year. Now, there's another caveat to this story. We also recognize that this has occurred due to very large transfers that have taken place on account of the government's crop procurement program. So these are transfers from urban consumers to rural producers. And this has now reached its peak. Last year, just to give you some idea, the government procured 9.5 million tons of wheat, the largest procurement in Pakistan's history, at 950 rupees, as you know, per mond. This translates into roughly a gross transfer of about 220 or 225 billion rupees to the rural sector. And that's not surprisingly showing up in production growth in motorcycles, in cars, and it's almost all being driven by the rural sector contributing to aggregate demand. However, what's happened is, as a result of this procurement program, and for the last 2 years, actually we need to go back 2 years, for the last 2 years, the support price of wheat has increased 90%. And that's a huge factor behind the inflation rate that we are currently facing. Right, so one, but it's produced growth, but it's produced inflation. It's also produced two other unintended consequences, I'm sure. One is that it's totally clogged this physical storage space in every godown and every silo of this country, in any part of this country. Right, so there is no, as of April 15th, as we start today, the crop procurement in Punjab and Sindh has already started. There is no physical space to accommodate the new purchases. One. Secondly, it's totally clogged the financial, the bank lines of the food departments, of PASCOs, and all the other entities that are involved, with a government guarantee standing behind it, that are involved in the crop procurement program. So therefore, there is no physical space unless we do something in a major way to 3 to 4 million tons of wheat. There is no way we can repeat this trick of providing an impetus to the rural sector and trying to get growth and whatever from it. So that's why I'm not as positive about the durability of this growth that we will see this year. One, I'm saying the actual growth rate in the economy will certainly be lower than this 3.5%, because we are not capturing, or not able to capture truly the output growth of the SME sector. One. And secondly, this growth, even if it's actually 3.5%, is unlikely to be sustainable because one large prop